I've always enjoyed the quiet mornings of my house. The noise of the wall clock, the smell of freshly brewed coffee, the light coming in through the kitchen window. It was the little piece I had left. At the age of 72, I no longer expected big surprises in life. I just wanted to end my days in peace, surrounded by the memories of my husband. But that day, the routine decided to betray me. I was cleaning the bookshelf in the living room, as I did every week. I picked up one of my husband's old books, one he loved, and I felt something slip out of it. At first, I thought it was an old bookmark. As I bent down, I saw a yellow envelope, folded, with my name written on it by hand. The heart raced out of nowhere. It had been years since I had seen anything written by him. My hands began to shake as I opened the envelope. Inside, there were some papers folded carefully, as if keeping a secret. I recognized the bank's logos, the tables, the numbers. They were old extracts, dating from before he fell ill. I frowned. Those amounts did not match what I remembered of our financial life. It was a lot of money coming out, and going to accounts I didn't know. I sat in his favorite armchair and stared at the papers, feeling a strange weight on my chest. Had I been more naive than I thought, or was there something he never had time to tell me? For a few minutes, I felt almost guilty, as if I was poking around where I shouldn't. But then another sensation appeared, that someone had messed with my life without my permission. I thought about calling my daughter Laura, but hesitated. She was always busy, always tired, always in a hurry. And when I brought up any subject of money, she sighed as if I were a confused child. Still, I needed to share it with someone. I didn't trust anyone else but her. At least that's how I still wanted to believe. I spent a lot of time rereading every statement, every line, every value. I remembered my husband sitting at the kitchen table, explaining to me the basics of bills, savings, alimony. He was never one to hide anything from me. That's why that envelope hidden in a book bothered me so much. If he had something to reveal to me, why would he have done it this way? In the afternoon, I made some tea to calm my nerves, but the cup trembled in my hands. The envelope was there on the table, as if staring at me. It was like a half-open door to a past that I always thought I knew well. Suddenly, I began to wonder if I really knew who I had lived with for so many years. And even worse, if I knew who my daughter lived with now. Laura had always said that I worried too much. Since marrying Mark, she has become more distant, colder, as if I were an extra burden in her adult life. I resigned myself, thinking that this was part of the natural cycle of things. But looking at those statements, I felt something different, a warning, as if my husband somehow was trying to show me something I never wanted to see. When I heard the car stopping in front of the house, my heart jumped. I recognized the sound of the door slamming. It was Mark's car. He rarely showed up unannounced. I instinctively ran to gather the papers and put the envelope in my coat pocket. I don't know why I did it. It was almost automatic, as if I knew deep down that those papers could not fall into the wrong hands. Mark entered without knocking, as he had become accustomed to doing. He smiled that usual fake smile and asked too loudly how I was. I felt my stomach turn. At that moment, with the envelope hidden against my chest, I was sure that something was very wrong. I just didn't know how big of a problem I was getting into. If you're enjoying the story, enjoy and subscribe to the channel now. It helps me a lot to keep bringing stories like this to you. Laura came right behind Mark, her purse slung over her shoulder and her phone still in her hand. She barely looked at me properly, gave a quick kiss on my forehead, and went straight to the kitchen. I watched her in silence, trying to guess what her mood would be that day. Mark, in turn, threw himself on the couch, as if he owned the room. That always bothered me, but I swallowed hard. "Mom, did you take the blood pressure medicine?" Laura asked without looking up. This is how our conversations began lately, with a question, a tone of distrust, and a hint of impatience. I sighed and said yes. But this time, something inside me burned. I didn't want to talk about medicines. I wanted to talk about what I had found. On the envelope, about the statements, about my husband. "Laura, I found something today," I said, trying to control my voice. She finally looked up, but not out of curiosity, but with irritation. Mark also turned his face. Interested. I felt a shiver. I reached into the pocket of my coat, feeling the crumpled paper inside. It was as if I was holding a bomb about to explode in the living room of my own house. "What a thing, Mom?" she asked, crossing her arms. I looked at Mark, who pretended not to pay attention, but kept his eyes fixed on the turned-off television. I knew him well enough to know that he was listening to every word. I tried to measure what he said. I explained slowly that I had found some old extracts in his father's book, that they had strange values, that there were transfers that I didn't remember. The effect was immediate. Laura rolled her eyes and let out a long sigh, as if she was tired even before I finished speaking. She complained, "You're already confusing things. It must be old paper. It says it has already been paid, something you don't remember well." Her words cut deeper than she imagined. I didn't want to be seen as a confused old woman. I knew very well what I had seen. Mark then entered the conversation with that sweet tone that always gave me goosebumps. "Mrs. Helen, it's normal for you to stay a little longer. Inattentive, right? With age, these things happen," he said, smiling. "If you want, I can take a look at these papers to help." At that moment, a small flame of distrust turned to a flash. He wanted to see the papers. He needed to see it. And that, for me, was reason enough to hide them even more. "You don't have to, Mark," I replied, cutting too fast. I still know how to read numbers. The silence that followed was heavy. Laura gave me a look of reproach, as if I was being rude for no reason. Mark pretended not to be offended, but I noticed his jaw stiffening. I could almost hear her thoughts. She's starting to give her trouble. And for the first time, I wondered how far he would go to silence someone who knew too much. The conversation went awry after that. Laura began to complain that I was stubborn, that I was always insisting on money matters, that I didn't trust anyone. I tried to explain that it wasn't that I just wanted to understand what those extracts meant. But the more I spoke, the more they seemed determined to put me in the position of fragile, confused, outdated. At one point, Mark got up and started walking around the room, gesticulating, saying he was worried about me. "I work all day, Laura too, and your mom stays here alone, mulling over things from the past. That's not healthy," he said. "You're stressing for nothing, Donna Helen. This can be harmful." As he spoke, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't know it yet, but those words were the beginning of something much worse. When they left, the house was even quieter than usual. I sat on the edge of the bed, took the envelope out of my pocket and rested it on my lap. Laura's words echoed in my head. "You're confusing things." For the first time, I cried not because of the longing for my husband, but because of the concrete fear of being erased little by my own family. And I had no idea that soon they would try to erase me for good. The night fell heavy that day, as if the sky was also suspicious of everything around me. I tried to sleep, but I woke up every half hour thinking about the envelope. In the end, I got up and decided to review it again, as if the answer to my fears was hidden in some detail that I had missed. It was then that I realized something even stranger. Most transfers started exactly the year Mark came into my daughter's life. My heart raced at this thought. Did my husband know something? Did he try to warn me and I never noticed? I still had the papers scattered on the bed when I heard a car coming at full speed. I looked out the window. It was Mark's car, but Laura wasn't with him. Fear took over me in a way that left me paralyzed for a few seconds. He entered without knocking, pushing the door hard enough to make it hit the wall. I cringed. He met me with the papers in his hand, and in one quick movement, ripped everything from me. The impact was so abrupt that my arms were burning. He said that I was getting dangerous, that I was making things up, and that it could harm the whole family. I had never seen him talk to me like that. The mask had fallen. I tried to retrieve the papers, but he held them tightly. I shouted Laura's name as if it would make a difference. He laughed, an icy, mocking laugh. He said that Laura didn't need to know anything, and that it was better for me to stop messing with old things. A shadow passed through his eyes. It was the first time I had seen such a clear threat in this man who pretended to be a lamb. He started walking around the house, opening drawers, rummaging through my desk as if he owned everything. I followed after him, trying to understand what he was looking for. When he came back to me, holding the empty envelope, he said that I needed professional help. That silenced any words I was still trying to say. Humiliation burned more than fear. He then slowly approached, very slowly, like I'm analyzing every muscle in my face. I stood still, trying to appear calm. He put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed it too hard. He said he was going to get it done soon, because I was getting out of control. It was at that moment that I was sure he wanted to silence me anyway. When it finally left, it took me minutes to close the door. My fingers trembled. I felt a metallic taste in my mouth, perhaps from so much fear. I entered the room, sat on the bed and hugged my own legs, trying to warm up. I knew I needed to seek help, but I also knew that Mark had carefully constructed an image of a good man, a devoted son-in-law. Who would believe me? I spent the rest of the night awake, listening to every little sound in the house. I had the constant feeling that something was about to happen, as if someone was about to cross the door again. For the first time in many years, I felt fear inside my own home, and this fear was not imaginary. He had a name, he had a face, and it was getting closer and closer to destroying my life. When the sun finally came out, I was ready to leave the house and ask for help. But before I could even put on my shoes, I heard knocking on the door, 3 beats, fast and hard. My heart froze. The feeling that danger had come too soon came like a punch in the stomach. And when I opened the door, I realized that Mark hadn't even waited for dawn to take the next step. He was there, accompanied by 2 men in white coats. They were not doctors. I knew that just by looking. Mark smiled, but it was a crooked smile, of someone who had already won a game before it even started. He said, with the greatest naturalness in the world, that he was worried about me, and that the professionals were there for evaluation. The word echoed like a sentence. I tried to close the door, but one of the men grabbed the handle before he could. Mark explained that Laura was shocked by my behavior and that he would have authorized the evaluation. My head spun. I didn't know if it was true or just another lie planted by him. The idea of my own daughter agreeing to that tore me inside. I started to say that I was fine, that I didn't need anything, but to my surprise, the 2 men did not come to talk. They came to take me. They moved forward, grabbed me by the arms and said it would be fast and safe. The feeling of invasion, of helplessness, was so great that my vision was blurred for a few seconds. I screamed, but it seemed that no one listened to me. Mark pretended to try to calm me down, saying it was for my own good. His every word was a stab. He didn't try to hide anything anymore. When I realized that they were really going to take me out of the house by force, I started fighting. But my weakened arms were no match for the heavy hands of the 2 men. They dragged me to the car while I begged for help from neighbors who weren't even at the window. Inside the car, the feeling of despair completely took over. I knocked on the glass, cried, said that it was a mistake. But the men kept cool, professional, as if I were just a number on a chip. Mark, sitting in the front seat, looked ahead, as if he were going to the supermarket. His calmness made me feel even more trapped. When we arrived at the clinic, the white and silent environment seemed already prepared to receive me. The smell of disinfectant, the distant sound of footsteps in the hallway. Everything gave me the feeling of entering a place where I would lose my voice. And that's exactly what Mark wanted, to make sure that no one took me seriously. Upon entering, I was greeted by a kind-looking nurse, but my heart was too frantic to trust anyone. Mark immediately started talking to her, saying that I was confused, aggressive, disoriented. His every word was a lie carefully constructed over months, maybe years. It was at that moment that a man in a blue coat appeared in the hallway, attentive eyes, firm steps, neutral expression. He introduced himself as Dr. Samuel and said he needed to talk to me before any procedure. Mark tried to interrupt, saying that I was in a panic. but the doctor raised his hand firmly, asking for silence. The first person who did not treat him as absolute authority. When I looked at the doctor, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. He calmly asked me what was going on. For the first time in hours, someone saw me as a human being, not as a problem, not as a nuisance. And when I started to speak, I noticed something in his eyes. He was watching the lies, one by one, breaking in the air. It was there, in that cold hallway, with my heart racing and eyes full of tears, that I realized that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. Dr. Samuel took me into a small room lit by a soft light, quite different from the cold weather of the hallway. As soon as I closed the door behind me, I felt like I had left the whole world outside. He pulled up a chair, sat down in front of me, and asked me to take a deep breath. It was the first time on that hellish day that anyone had spoken to me without raising their voice or treating me like a problem. I told it all at once, running over words, trying to rearrange thoughts that seemed to escape my mouth before I could reach them. I talked about the envelope, the transfers, Mark's strange behavior, the unexpected visit, the violence, the forced internment. When I finished, I was exhausted, as if I had run an emotional marathon. Dr. Samuel did not interrupt me once. He only moved his chin slightly, as if he were already putting together the pieces of a puzzle. When I finished, he asked some simple but direct questions: dates, names, locations. He looked into my eyes as I answered, and it made me feel seen, as if my words still had value, a feeling that I no longer remembered what it was like. Mark, however, did not take long to appear at the door of the room, trying to control the conversation. He said I was confused, mixing past and present, making up stories. The doctor asked him to wait outside. Mark tried to insist, but Dr. Samuel's firm and polite tone made it clear that inside he wasn't in charge. I saw the discomfort stamped on his face, and that gave me a little flame of courage. After he left, Dr. Samuel asked me to re-describe the extracts I found. She asked how my husband used to handle finances, if we had ever had problems of this kind. I answered everything sincerely. He wrote down details that I didn't even know were important. With each note, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my voice. At the end of the conversation, he carefully explained to me that no one could admit me without proper evaluation, examinations, interviews, and complete documentation. And, above all, that nothing in my speech indicated a loss of lucidity. When I heard this, my chest seemed to deflate. Someone was finally seeing the truth. Before escorting me to the observation ward, he looked at me and said, "Helen, it's not you who's wrong here, and I'm going to find out exactly what's going on." It was like hearing a promise I didn't know I needed so much. In years, it was the first time I felt that someone was willing to fight for me. As we left the room together, I noticed Mark watching us from the hallway, arms crossed, jaw tense. He knew he was losing control of the situation, and I knew that made it even more dangerous. I stayed in the observation room while Dr. Samuel interviewed Mark and Laura separately. I saw the two of them passing through the hallway, each with a different expression. Laura seemed nervous, lost, as if she wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Mark, on the contrary, walked confidently, as if he was sure that everything was already decided in his favor. When Laura came in to talk to the doctor, I watched her through the inside window. She moved her hands compulsively, something she only did when she was lying or hiding something. My heart ached. I wanted to believe that she was only influenced by Mark, not that she was consciously participating in this terrible plan. But doubt was already beginning to poison my thoughts. Then it was Mark's turn. He walked in smiling, the same rehearsed smile he wore at family gatherings. Through the glass, I could see the way he spoke: calculated gestures, patient tone, paternalistic expression. It was like watching a trained actor, and somehow, seeing it from the outside made me understand how much I had been manipulated over the years. When the door opened and he left the room, our eyes met. His smile disappeared, giving way to a cold look, like ice cutting through my skin. It was a silent warning, He knew he was being questioned, and he didn't like that. I ran my hand over the arm where he had held me the day before, still sore. My body remembered the force he used, a force no one else had seen. Shortly after, Dr. Samuel entered the room where I was. He walked over, sat next to me, and explained that there were serious inconsistencies in Mark's stories. Some dates didn't match, some reports were too exaggerated, others simply impossible. He said this cautiously, but his eyes reflected something else: real distrust. Nurse Claire also approached me at that moment. She had a sweet but attentive look. He said that when Mark arrived, he was too tense, too anxious, almost hostile. He commented that this had caught the attention of the team. I took a deep breath, feeling that for the first time, other people were noticing the monster behind the mask. Dr. Samuel assured that nothing would happen without a complete evaluation. He said that I would not be medicated against my will, and that they did not accept Mark's documentation because it was incomplete and poorly filled out. Hearing this gave me a sense of small but mighty victory. Mark had failed in his immediate plan. At the end of the conversation, Dr. Samuel asked me to rest. But how could I rest when the man who tried to destroy my life was only a few feet away, waiting for the next opportunity? Even so, that night, for the first time in many days, I slept for a few hours. It was not a peaceful sleep, but it was a possible sleep. And when I woke up, I realized something very clear. If I wanted to survive that nightmare, I needed to trust those who were finally seeing the truth. I could no longer face Mark alone. The next morning, I woke up with the strange feeling that something had changed during the night. The light coming in through the window seemed cold, almost metallic, and the infirmary was too quiet. When Nurse Claire came to take my blood pressure, I noticed that she avoided looking toward the hallway, as if she knew something I didn't already know. My stomach tightened. A short time later, Dr. Samuel entered the room holding a clipboard. His countenance was more serious than the day before. He sat next to me and explained to me that he had requested from the administrative sector all the documents that Mark delivered to justify my hospitalization. But when he received them, he noticed something alarming. The sheets were incomplete. Some signatures were clearly different, and certain passages seemed to have been written in haste, like improvised patches. I felt my heart race. Mark had falsified documents. Not only had he tried to silence me, he had done so using recorded, cold, calculated lies. Dr. Samuel then asked for more details about the envelope I found. He asked me to describe again the dates, the amounts, the names of the accounts involved. As I spoke, he wrote everything down with extreme attention. I watched him and felt a strange mixture of relief and awe. The more evidence he gathered, the more dangerous the game became for Mark. When the doctor left the room for a few minutes, I heard two voices arguing near the front desk. Mark's voice was unmistakable. He was excited, putting pressure on someone. I stood up, discreetly approached the half-open door, and overheard part of the conversation. He insisted that I needed sedation, that I had been delirious since early on. His tone was not one of concern, it was one of despair. Shortly after, Dr. Samuel returned. He closed the door behind him carefully and said that Mark was trying to interfere with the team, insisting that they release my medical record. The doctor made it clear. He wants to control the narrative, Helen. This is not the behavior of those who are concerned about you. I felt a shiver run down my back. I already knew that, but hearing someone confirm it out loud made it all the more real. Nurse Claire came in soon after, bringing me some tea. She approached slowly and told me, almost in a whisper, that she had found Mark walking the halls late at night near the room where they keep the medical records. When questioned, he made up a silly excuse, saying that he got lost looking for the bathroom. She didn't believe it, and neither did Dr. Samuel. The doctor decided to increase the security on my records. It also removed Mark from the list of people authorized to ask questions about my medical condition. When he told me this, I felt a lump in my throat. I was no longer completely unprotected. For the first time, someone put a barrier between me and my attacker. At the end of the morning, while watching the movement of the clinic through the window glass, I felt that something big was about to happen. The game had ceased to be silent. Mark was losing control. And this kind of man, when he loses control, becomes even more dangerous. I knew he wouldn't give up so easily. But now, I also knew that I was no longer fighting alone. The next day, Dr. Samuel entered the room with an expression that mixed satisfaction and concern. I sat up in bed, immediately alert. He closed the door, pulled up a chair, and took a deep breath before speaking. It was the kind of breath that heralds a revelation or a catastrophe. I held air. He explained that the night before, he had requested access to old records from the bank where my husband kept accounts. He used personal and professional contacts to get part of the movement of years ago. And then he said the words I'll never forget. Helen, the transfers you found were not made by her husband. I felt my whole body tremble. It was like hearing the ground cracking beneath my feet. Dr. Samuel continued. He said that the signatures on the statements were clearly forged, that the destination accounts belonged to people connected to Mark, and that some were even active to this day. He spoke carefully, measuring every word so as not to scare me, but how not to be scared when the truth suddenly becomes so much bigger than you imagined. As he explained everything, an image began to form in my mind. My husband, already sick, fragile, trusting Mark to solve bureaucratic issues without imagining that he was putting the wolf inside the house. My chest tightened. It wasn't just cheating on me. It was betrayal with the man I had loved the most. I asked the doctor since when this happened. He replied that from the dates, everything indicated that the deviations began shortly after Laura and Mark started dating. More than a decade of lies, of manipulation, of theft. I felt my body heat up and then freeze, as if my emotions didn't know where to run. Nurse Claire entered the room at that moment, carrying a briefcase in her hands. Inside it, there were more documents that corroborated what the doctor was saying. She looked at me fondly, as if apologizing for delivering something so painful. I opened the folder slowly, as if touching open wounds, and there was more evidence. More lies, more years of my life being ripped away without me knowing. Dr. Samuel explained to me that it was serious enough to involve lawyers, and that he had already made contact with a trusted professional. He also said that we needed to act quickly, because Mark would realize that he was being investigated, and men like that, when cornered, often attack. That word, to attack, echoed within me. But along with the fear, I felt something new, something hot, something I hadn't felt in a long time: indignation. I was no longer just a victim. I had a gun now, the truth, and allies willing to fight by my side. At the end of the conversation, Dr. Samuel put a firm hand on my shoulder and said, "Helen, it's time for you to get back everything he took away." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time since the beginning of this nightmare, I felt that I could win. The story is getting intense, right? Then leave the like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any chapter of our exciting stories full of twists and turns. I spent the morning watching the movement in the hallway, feeling the tension grow like a second skin. Every door that opened, every low conversation between the employees, everything seemed charged with a hidden meaning. I knew Mark would make his move very soon. He wasn't the kind of man who would accept losing control, and Dr. Samuel had just knocked him off center stage. In the early afternoon, Nurse Claire came to my office with a coffee. She closed the door behind her, something she never did, and sat down next to me. There was a firm expression on her face, something between concern and determination. Then, with a heavy sigh, she told what she had seen the night before. Mark trying to enter the medical record room again, this time with more insistence and without disguising his nervousness. She said she confronted him, asking what he was looking for there. Mark came up with another absurd excuse. He said he was looking for a break room. Claire didn't believe a word, and he noticed. She saw the cold look he gave before he walked away, as if she were an inconvenient obstacle, the kind of look I knew well. When she finished the story, she touched my arm carefully. "Helen, don't be alone with him. Under no circumstances." Those words pierced me like a blade, not because I didn't know about the danger, but because it was the first time anyone had said it out loud, someone who saw Mark for what he really was. A short time later, Dr. Samuel entered the room. Claire stood up immediately, as if she was already waiting for him. They exchanged a complicit look, like allies who recognize each other in the midst of chaos. The doctor closed the door and said that the time had come to act officially, and that the lawyer was already on his way to the clinic. My heart pounded. The image of Mark losing control, watching his lie be dismantled piece by piece, gave me a courage I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer a vulnerable, forgetful lady. I had allies. There were people believing in me. I had the truth on my side. When the lawyer arrived, a man with a calm speech and attentive eyes, we began to put the puzzle together. Every extract described, every false document, every attempt by Mark to silence me, everything fell into place. It was a solid case, strong enough to topple the perfect image he had been selling for years. As we spoke, I heard the sound of quick footsteps in the hallway. Mark was there. He prowled the door like a predator that smelled threat. I cringed for a moment, but Nurse Claire stood by me, firm like a silent wall, and at that moment I realized something simple but powerful. He no longer intimidated me as before. When Mark finally gave up and walked away, Dr. Samuel smiled sideways and said, "He knows he's losing," and for the first time, I felt that this was true. The next morning, Laura showed up at the clinic. Just seeing her standing in the doorway, hugging her bag to her chest, I felt my heart tighten. She looked more haggard than usual. There were shadows under his eyes, and his body trembled as if it were facing an inner storm. When she saw me, she broke down in tears, something she rarely did. She ran to hug me, but the hug had something strange. He seemed both sincere and desperate, as if he were trying to ask me for forgiveness without using words. When he walked away, he looked at me with the confused expression of a lost child. "Mark said you had a freak out last night who tried to escape." My chest burned. That was more than a lie. It was an attempt to eliminate my credibility for good. Before I could answer, Dr. Samuel entered the room. He asked to talk to Laura privately. I watched the two of them walk down the hallway, and my daughter's every step felt heavy, dragged as if she was carrying the weight of years of manipulation on her back. My maternal instinct wanted to run after her, to protect her, but I knew that now it was the truth who needed to protect her. It took almost half an hour for her to return. When he entered the room again, I saw that there was something different in his eyes. It was no longer just irritation or doubt. Crack. A fissure in the blind, trust she always had in Mark. She sat down in front of me, took several deep breaths, and then said, "Dr. Samuel showed me a few things, some dates, some papers." She swallowed. "I don't know what to think, Mom. It's a lot at once." I wanted to take her hands, but she backed away as if she still doesn't know if she should trust her own touch. Laura started talking about things that had been going on for months. Mark keeping track of her accounts, managing all the money in the house, asking her to sign documents without reading them. He said that he always justified everything as practicality. She believed. Of course he believed. She was young, passionate, and Mark knew exactly how to shape that vulnerability. When she finally looked up at me, I saw a painful mixture of guilt and despair. And what if he did all that? My eyes filled with tears, but I didn't cry. I couldn't. This was the moment for her to fall apart, and I needed to be the fortress she never imagined I could be. Before we could continue, Mark appeared in the doorway, abrupt, breathing heavily. His eyes sparkled with anger when he saw Laura there, when he saw the doctor talking to me, when he realized that his web was crumbling. He tried to call Laura away, but she hesitated. And that little gesture, that microsecond of hesitation, was like a knife going into the perfect mask he'd always worn. Mark walked over, tried to grab Laura by the arm, but she pulled away for the first time. Dr. Samuel immediately intervened, placing himself between us. It was a tense, silent moment, loaded with a deep meaning. My daughter finally saw the shadow I had been carrying for years. When Mark stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Laura looked at me as if she saw me for the first time. I think I was married to a stranger. I wanted to say that she wasn't wrong, but instead, I just hugged her, because for the first time in a long time, she needed me as much as I needed her. The next day, I woke up with a feeling that was difficult to explain. It was as if the air was heavier, as if something important was about to happen. The whole clinic looked different, as if everyone there knew we were getting to the heart of the problem. I barely had time to get up when Dr. Samuel walked in, accompanied by the lawyer and of Laura. She had deep, dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady, much firmer than the day before. The doctor placed a thick paste on the table. When he opened it, he revealed a series of printed documents, bank records, compared signatures, dates, suspicious movements, everything organized in a way that even I, who didn't understand finance, was able to follow. The lawyer explained each point calmly, showing how the deviations coincided with periods when Mark helped my husband with bureaucracies. Laura put her hand to her mouth when she saw the forged signatures. They were copies of documents she vaguely remembered signing without reading, instructed by Mark. Her shock was visible. It was like seeing the truth forcibly make its way into the mind of someone who had lived for years inside a carefully manufactured bubble. She trembled, and I kept silent so as not to interfere with that painful process. When Dr. Samuel showed the report containing handwriting comparisons, proving that it wasn't my husband who signed most of the documents, Laura let out a sob. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, tears I had never seen in her since she got married. "All the time," he whispered. I wanted to hold her, but she stood up abruptly and began to walk around the room, as if trying to escape the reality that was engulfing her. The lawyer went on to explain that the embezzlements amounted to a huge amount over the years, money that my husband saved by sweating decades of work, money that should be guaranteeing me a peaceful old age. And yet, he had been drained by someone who came into our lives with a soft smile and clean hands, hands that were now soiled with everything he had stolen from us. Laura, still in shock, asked, "What about my mother's hospitalization?" Is he really? Dr. Samuel firmly confirmed. He tried to use an emergency procedure with irregular documentation, and he tried to interfere with the clinical records. This is serious, very serious. I watched my daughter collapse, finally seeing the monster that slept in the bed next to her every night. When the lawyer said he had gathered enough evidence to call a formal meeting, a legal confrontation within the clinic itself, my heart pounded. Mark would be forced to face the truth, without masks, without scripts, without control. And this time, it wouldn't just be me against him. It would be the whole truth against his lie. At the end, while everyone was preparing for the meeting, Laura approached me. Her eyes were red, but there was something new there. Courage. "I'll stand by you." It was the first time in a long time that I had heard these words coming from her, and they gave me strength for what was to come next. The news that the clinic would hold a formal meeting with a lawyer present spread through the silent corridors like a cold wind. The staff watched us with restrained curiosity, realizing that something very serious was about to happen. I walked to the reserved room with my heart racing, but also with a firmness that I didn't recognize in myself. It was as if each step dispelled years of accumulated fear. The room was arranged simply, a long table, chairs lined up, a jug of water in the center. Dr. Samuel reviewed documents with the lawyer, while Laura remained quiet by my side, taking a deep breath repeatedly. Seeing her there, I felt a painful pride, as if I were finally recovering a piece of my family that Mark had quietly torn from me. When the door opened and Mark entered, the air seemed to change. He didn't smile this time. His eyes were narrowed, analyzing every face, every posture, every detail. He tried to sit next to Laura, but she turned her body away in a firm gesture. The rejection hit him like an invisible punch, and I saw the first clear sign that his confidence was beginning to crumble. The lawyer began the meeting by explaining that the evidence collected required immediate clarification. Mark tried to stay calm, saying that it was all just a misunderstanding, that I was confusing situations, that he always took care of the family. But when Dr. Samuel presented the documents, statements, forged signatures, incompatible dates, his mask began to shatter. Laura leaned her fingers against the table, trembling, and asked, her voice breaking, "Mark, did you steal my mother's money?" He tried to laugh, a nervous fake laugh that sounded like scratches on a wooden door. "Honey, you know what your mother is like. She's exaggerating, mixing things up. The lawyer interrupted him, impassive, exposing new evidence. It was impossible to deny. Mark then tried to turn the tables by accusing Dr. Samuel of stalking, saying that the clinic wanted to profit from my hospitalization. The accusation was so absurd that even Nurse Claire, who was providing support, had to contain a reaction. The doctor, however, maintained his posture. "The only person here trying to profit from anyone, Mark. It's you." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then it was my turn. With trembling hands, I took a deep breath and told aloud everything I had experienced. I talked about the night he snatched my papers, the veiled threats, the feeling of walking on shards of glass over the years. Each word seemed to break an invisible thread that kept me trapped in fear. When I was done, I realized that I myself was surprised by my strength. Laura began to cry, not of weakness, but of deliverance. "I can't believe I lived with this," she said, staring at her husband as if she were seeing a stranger. Mark, cornered, stood up abruptly, knocking over the chair. He tried to leave, but 2 security guards from the clinic, discreetly called Dr. Samuel, appeared at the door. Not to arrest him, but to ensure that no one was intimidated or threatened. It was the first time I saw Mark truly small, truly impotent. The meeting ended with the lawyer formally notifying me that I would be legally protected and that proceedings would be initiated immediately. I stood up slowly, feeling my legs tremble, not from fear, but from relief. A part of me still didn't believe that all this was really happening. That I, Helen, 72, had finally disarmed the man who tried to steal my entire life. And as I left the room, Dr. Samuel smiled at me, not a smile of comfort, but of recognition. When I left the room, my legs were still shaking, but there was something different in my chest, a kind of brute force that I hadn't felt since I was young. The truth, after so many years crushed, had finally exploded, and with it, something inside me had also awakened. The clinic seemed brighter, as if each corridor reflected the beginning of my liberation. Mark was led to another room by security guards. He was not imprisoned, but he also did not have the freedom to circulate. It was the first time he had not dictated the rules, and to see this, it was like breathing for the first time after years of suffocation. I sat on the aisle bench, trying to organize everything that had happened, while Laura remained by my side, in absolute silence. Laura seemed to be broken in two, his eyes fixed on the floor, his fingers intertwined as if trying to keep his own hands from shaking. It was hard for me, too, to see her that way, but I knew that this pain was the beginning of healing, not the end. I touched her hand carefully, and she didn't pull as before. Instead, it held my fingers tightly. Dr. Samuel approached. He looked tired, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet glow, perhaps satisfaction at having unmasked someone so dangerous. He informed us that Mark would be formally notified, and that within the next few hours, the police and the lawyer would begin all legal proceedings. Laura put her hand to her mouth, trying to contain a sob. It was like watching a lifetime crumble before your very eyes. It was then that Claire appeared, bringing a briefcase she had retrieved the night before, the one Mark had tried to access. Inside were old records, internal notes from the clinic, and among the papers a document that made me freeze. A pre-filled request for my permanent hospitalization, dated weeks before that day. This meant that Mark planned everything in advance. My throat closed. The nurse took a deep breath and said he was already preparing this. Long before any supposed outbreak, he wanted to get her out of the way. That was like a punch to the soul. His intention was always clear, but knowing that he had organized, that he had acted calmly and coolly, made it all the more cruel. Shortly after, the lawyer called us to a new room. It was time to formalize my testimony. I entered accompanied by Laura, who still seemed stunned. In that room, I said everything I remembered in detail. The veiled threats, the constant humiliation, the way he snatched the documents from my hand, how he tried to discredit me in front of everyone. Each word was a piece that dismantled his mask. Mark, called up, came on minutes later. As soon as he saw me, his face changed. He tried, for the last time, to use the same soft voice, the same sweet tone, the same strategy of years. It's confusing everything. But I was no longer that silent, passive, shrunken woman. I looked him right in the eyes and replied, "The only thing I confused was thinking you were human." The whole room fell silent. Even the air seemed to stop. The lawyer then presented each piece of evidence, one by one, dismantling any explanation Mark was trying to come up with. He sweated, pulled on his collar, clasped his hands until his fingers turned white. Laura cried softly, but did not look away. She needed to see that truth, whole, raw, irreversible. In the end, Mark lost control. He screamed, accused, tried to blame everyone, but it was too late. The clinic recorded everything. So does the lawyer. The truth was there, exposed like an infected wound, torn from under the skin. When the meeting ended and the security guards took him outside, I felt a gigantic weight leave my shoulders. The truth finally had conquered the lie. Not without pain, not without damage, but he won. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The next day started differently. I woke up without the constant weight on my chest, without that suffocating feeling of being trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The light coming in through the window seemed warmer, more real. I sat up in bed, let the light touch my face, and for the first time in a while, I felt peace, even if it was a fragile peace, born of war. I was released from the clinic early in the morning. Dr. Samuel accompanied me to the exit. He explained to me that everything was being forwarded to the authorities. The embezzlements, the forgeries, the attempts to coerce the medical team. Mark would be formally investigated and could not approach me. Something in my chest tightened, fear and relief mingling like two opposing currents. Outside, Laura was waiting for me. Her eyes were swollen, and she looked smaller than I remembered. When she saw me, she ran to me, and this time the hug was sincere, strong, full of regret and pain. "Mom, I didn't know. I didn't want to believe it. I stroked her hair as I did when she was little. I know. It was not full forgiveness. It was not forgetfulness. It was just the beginning of something new, something rebuilt on ruins." In the car, she remained silent for a long time. Her world had fallen apart, and I couldn't rebuild it for her. Each one needs to put their own pieces together. But when she held my hand halfway through, I felt that maybe, just maybe, we would be able to move on, even if in a crooked way. When I got home, I felt a lump in my throat. My door, my things, my smell, everything still bore Mark's shadow. But it also carried memory, history, roots. It was my home, and I wasn't going to allow him to take that from me. Laura insisted on staying with me for a few days. I accepted, but I made it clear that I needed space, silence, time. She understood. For the first time in years, she really listened to me, and this listening was worth more than any request for forgiveness. In the afternoon, the lawyer called me informing me that Mark had already been officially notified. The investigations would advance quickly. With each new piece of news, I felt as if another chain was being broken. I was getting my freedom back, and this time, I wouldn't give it up for anything. At night, while Laura slept in the guest room, I sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. My house was silent. It wasn't the heavy silence that once surrounded me, filled with fear and uncertainty. It was my silence, my space, my life recovered. And in that instant, I realized something simple and devastating. Mark hadn't just tried to take my money. He tried to take my ID, my voice, my value. But I survived. I fought. I won. And as I opened my eyes, I felt that a new part of my life was about to begin, a part in which I would finally own myself. The days that followed were like waking up from an emotional coma. Each morning seemed new, but loaded with echoes of what had happened. The house still had Mark's shadows, objects out of place, uncomfortable memories, but little by little, I put everything back on track. I cleaned drawers, threw away what bound me to the past, and let the air in through the open windows, as if the light could drive the last trace of it from the walls. Laura, still devastated, stayed with me for another week. She tried to help, but she got lost in deep thoughts, immersed in regrets that belonged only to her. Sometimes I would find her standing in the bedroom doorway, staring at me, as if she wanted to apologize again. I always said the same thing. Daughter, life also deceives young people. She cried silently. Love was there, but wounded, too patched up to be whole again now. When she finally returned to the apartment, she hugged me tightly. He said he would start therapy, that he wanted to understand how he had been blinded for so long. I smiled with sadness and pride. It was an important step, a step that only she could take. With the house finally my own, I had to face real silence. Not the tormented silence I'd experienced before, but a new one, filled with possibilities. I sat in the living room, looked at the empty walls, and thought about what to do with my life from now on. At the age of 72, I felt an unusual urgency to prove to myself that there was still much to be lived. I decided to renovate the house, something light, simple, but that brought color and life back. I changed curtains, moved furniture, bought new fabrics. I had always enjoyed sewing, but I had put that pleasure aside for years, stifled by Mark's imposition that I didn't have to work. Now I wanted to do more than sew for myself. I wanted to make it my own. It took me a few days organizing materials, reviewing old patterns, choosing fabrics that I had kept for decades. I called a neighbor who always complimented my pieces and asked if she was still interested in bespoke clothes. She responded enthusiastically. Within a few weeks, I had my first orders, small, modest, but mine. My work, my income, my dignity rebuilt point by point. In parallel, the lawyer updated me on the case. The investigation against Mark was moving fast, much faster than I had imagined. The evidence was solid, incontestable, and a warrant for removal had already been signed. Knowing that he couldn't approach me brought a peace that I hadn't felt since before his marriage to Laura. One day, while tidying up an old box that was in the back of the closet, I found something unexpected. More old documents. Papers my husband had kept about old investments, accounts I thought were closed, and letters that mentioned people I didn't know. I felt my heart beating strongly. It was like finding more pieces of a puzzle that I didn't even know existed. I sat in the chair, opened the box slowly, and started reading. There were details there that could change some things, maybe even reveal secrets that my husband tried to protect from me. But this time, I didn't feel afraid. I felt determination. I was no longer the woman who let documents gather dust at the bottom of a book. Now I wanted to know everything. I carefully closed the box and placed it on the table, not as a threat, but as an invitation to the future. A new investigation could be beginning, not as urgent or painful as the last one, but still important. My husband had left traces, and I intended to follow them when I was ready. That night, I made some tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sky begin to darken. I felt the wind touch my face like a soft embrace. For the first time in many years, I felt no fear of tomorrow. I felt curious. I wouldn't get my life back as it was before, and that was good. Because that Helen, the one who lived for years cowering, silent, underestimated, this Helen was no more. Now, I was different, strong, attentive, reborn. And as night fell, I looked at the box on the table and smiled slightly. The story was not yet over, but this time I was the one who wrote the next chapter. And now I want to know from you, what did you think of this story? Do you believe that Helen did the right thing to face everything to the end? Have you ever experienced or witnessed a situation of manipulation like this? Comment below. Your opinion is very important and even helps this video reach more people who like exciting stories like you. And of course, if you haven't signed up yet, take the opportunity to do so now and activate the bell to follow the next incredible stories to come.